With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Chai, Daf Yud Ches. We left off 11 lines from the top of the Amid. We're going to begin learning fundamental questions, starting with if there is the din of lavud be'emtza. Now, really, lavud is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Lavud applies, according to all opinions, not only when it comes to bridging a gap in a wall. If the space between one and the other is less than 3 tfachim, then it's considered mamish and next connected. Lavud l'kula alma is going to apply if there is a question whether schach is touching a wall. So even though the schach is laid horizontally, but we want to know whether it's considered as if it's touching that which is vertical. Vertical lavud is said l'kula alma. However, when it comes to applying lavud in our scenarios, and what are we learning about? We're learning about that if there is a open gap, avir basukah, going in middle of the schach from one end to the other. So we learned that avir only begimel pasels the sukkah by making it considered 2 separate sukkahs, implying, as we have been learning until now, that if it is less than 3 tvachim, then we also will apply the din of lavud, and now we will see that this is really subject to a machloikes amoraim. We're going to be learning about the avruma fish. I think perhaps today what is similar at least to the avruma fish will be tuna fish. The issue with tuna fish, or in the Gemara, the avruma fish, is that that fish itself is mamish kosher. However, there are bodies of waters where together with the tuna fish, you might chop fish that look like tuna, but they're not tuna. And if you don't have an expert overlooking all of the fishalach, then you can mistakenly eat fish that's not kosher. Same thing was in the times of Chazal. When it comes to the avruma fish, was actually a much smaller fish than tuna fish. But we're going to be learning about how in certain areas there was no non-kosher small fish that were similar but not kosher mixed with them. And in other areas you had such a problem, and therefore it was problematic for you just to go and catch avruma fish. Maybe you will be eating together with it also, God forbid, non-kosher fish. We're going to be going back to the case in the Mishnah about the achsadra, where you have this chutzner that houses from all 3 sides, and there are porches that were made really to support the second story. But the porches also serve as roofs or protrusion over the doors downstairs. And what people did in that chutzner is that they simply placed schach on top of all of the roofs. The Mishnah used that as an example of the din of doifen akuma by telling us that as long as the roofs from the walls of the houses are less than 4 amas, then the sukkah will be a kosher sukkah. And we will learn in the Gemara that there will be other scenarios, and even if these protrusions, even if the roof of the achsadra is 4 amas or more, there will be times that placing schach will allow one to eat underneath it. How that is reconciled with the Mishnah is something that we will have to see. We're going to introduce the sugya as a machloekes between Abaye and Rava, and that will be connected to something new that we never yet spoke about in Sukah, and that is the din of pi tikra yored v'soisim. The edge of the roof extends downwards. We did learn not that long ago, and we mentioned already in the introduction to the Masechta, the concept of good achis, and that is when you have a wall 10 tfachim, whether it goes down. We had that machlokes tanoim, right? Rabbi Yossi and everyone else. We quoted the similar machlokes when it comes to Shabbos and Eruvin, Rabbi Yehuda and the other tanoim. Yeah, linked, not linked. Pi tikra is similar but not the same. Pi tikra means the following: that when you have a roof, as long as the height of the roof, the thickness of the roof is 1 tefach or more, and the roof is not slanted, but the roof is straight. So just imagine you have a roof in right angle, right? There is a piece of the roof that comes down for 1 tefach or more. It's not a mechitza at all, it's the roof. It's called the edge of the roof. So there is a concept that once you have such a roof, pi tikra yored v'soisim, it's as if halachically it goes all the way down and you have yourself walls. Now hold on, if people are going to think about that and they're going to ask, if that's the case, if a person is going to build a sukkah and the schach is 1 tefach thick, maybe you don't need to have any walls. Because let's say pi tikra yored v'soisim, if you're going to subscribe to that, and halachically you have walls on all the sides. And we're going to see limitations to pitikra yored v'soisim, real limitations when it comes to sukkah. And first, and most importantly, and guys, this is a fantastic rule, halacha l'maiser for us, a sukkah must be built in a way that first you have the walls, and then you put the schach. Even if you're going to build not the 2 walls and the tefach, or the 2 walls and Almid Rabban and the 7 tvachim, you're going to build yourself a sukkah with 4 walls. But if first you place the schach and then you build the walls, that in itself invalidates the sukkah.
Rabbi, how is pitikra different than the good achis?
It's much stronger than good achis. Good achis means Tanach that you already at least have a vant, right? And then you put it down. Good pitikra means you don't even have a wall at all. It's a much stronger application. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of limitations with the pitikra tzamach, and that is primarily with the fact that you only say pitikra if you have a tefach thick roof. And not everyone has schach that's thick a tefach. But most importantly, even when you have schach that's thick a tefach, it's worth nothing if you are lechatchila building a sukkah by simply placing thick schach, because even if you say pitikra yored v'soisim, what really happened is first you have the schach, and then you say it extends downwards, and then you have the walls, which invalidates it. So where will pitikra be negay? If that's the case, it should never be applied to a sukkah. That's not true, because what happens if you build a proper sukkah, and after you build a sukkah, a wall falls down? So you did put the schach after you had walls. Now, if you will subscribe to pitikra yored v'soisim, at least perhaps, even though a wall fell down, now you have yourself a new wall because of the pitikra. And we're going to speak a lot. You're welcome. Okay, and finally, we're going to compare this concept of pitikra yored v'soisim as it applies to sukkah to a similar machlokes there between earlier Amoraim. Here by Sukah, the question of machlokes Abaye and Rava. The earlier Amoraim, Rav and Shmuel debated regarding achsadra bebika, which is when you have an open pavilion, you have 4 beams, and then you have a roof, and you have it out there in a bika, which is either in a carmelis, and you want to know whether you are allowed to carry under this shaded area, under the achsadra, more than 4 amas. You know, it might be a larger, it can be 10 amas, it can be 20 amas. Whether you say there also, pitikra yored v'soisim. Now guys, by Shabbos, if you subscribe to pitikra yored v'soisim, then you don't have to build walls before, there's no schach, it's just about mechitzas. So there's taka machlokes between Rav and Shmuel whether you can carry underneath it or not, and we're going to see whether we link the arguments of Sukkah and Shabbos or whether they're not necessarily linked, and much, much more. Let us start. Again, 11 lines from the top of the Amid. Yes, we learned lavud. We learned lavud l'kula alma, like we said, as it applies to a vertical wall. We learned lavud l'kula alma as it applies to having schach that's near the wall of the sukkah. So even though we are using lavud to extend it more horizontally, but the very fact that it's going into a wall, it's still called vertical lavud, in which no one debates that yes, we say lavud. If the gap is less than 3 tfachim, it is annexed. But Amar Abaye, says Abaye, okay, 1 second, avir shloisha b'sukkah. If you have, like we spoke about, you have the middle of the sukkah airspace, so it splits the sukkah into 2. The problem here is that neither side will have the minimum 3 walls. If now you go umi atoy, if you diminish that gap of air, whether you add kanim, which is valid schach, whether you add shapudin, spits of metal, which is invalid schach. So based on what we learned above, which is that the psul of open space, the psul of pasal sukkah do not combine. Chavra, that was the last amud, because things that have different shiurim do not combine. So it's good, have a miut. Then you'll have a kosher sukkah with 3 walls. You had 3 walls, you lost it because you had this airspace in the middle. Now you're diminishing it. Even if you are diminishing it with pasal eschach, I know pasal eschach is a problem for itself, but don't forget that pasal eschach only invalidate a sukkah if it is 4 tfachim or more, not 3 tfachim. They have different shiurim. They don't combine. However, if you have a sukkah ketana, which means you have the minimum size sukkah, which is 7 by 7, that's the way we paskin, and you have noch on top of that 3 tefach ear space going through the middle. Here, my friends, the problem isn't only that you separated the sukkahs into 2, but we don't have the minimum size sukkah. That's a different invalidation. So here, only if you fix it by putting kanim, which is valid schach, then have a miut. Because based on the rule of lavud, and again, guys, we're going now like we learned until now that we always say lavud, side, the middle. Lavud means it's as if it's filled with kosher schach. So you have yourself a valid minimum size sukkah, 7 by 7 tvachim. But over here, if you're going to fill the gap with shapudin, and you're going to bring it from 3 to less than 3, or you're going to completely cover it, even though the issue of a psul, because avir be'emtza, or pasul schach be'emtza, won't be applicable, they don't combine, but don't forget that there's a bigger problem here. You don't have the minimum 7 by 7. And yeah, we say lavud does resolve it. Pasul schach cannot resolve it. Not because it's combining and creating 2 separate sukkahs. It doesn't combine for separating the sukkahs, but it doesn't resolve the problem that the sukkah doesn't have the minimum size, and therefore lay have a miut. Phenomenal. And now, says the Gemara, everything we learned until now, the avir be'emtza, you know what that means? Avir be'emtza lukula alma will only mean if you have avir that's near the wall, like we had in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin. That if it's less than 3, that's how the Mishnah introduced it, right? That if you have the schach did not begin by the wall, the schach only began away from the wall. But if it's within 3 tvachim from the wall, lavud. No one debates that. And the Mishnah really is teaching us by implication that if it's 3 tfachim away from the wall, well, then you got a problem. You can't count that wall as a wall. Now, do we say the same din of lavud be'emtza? That's a machlekes amiroim. V'hanimili, that the statement which will go according to everyone is minatzad. Aval be'emtza, but if it's going to be in middle of a sukkah, it doesn't mean middle. It means that you're not trying to connect schach to wall. You're trying to connect schach to schach. That's called lavud horizontal. Here, pliga baravacha v'ravina. Here, there's a machlekes amiroim. Chad amar, and that's always whenever you have these 2 amiroim. The ravina is the mekel. Chad amar goes on ravina. Ravina says yes, yesh lavud be'emtza. And by the way, that's the way we paskin. So everything we learned until now doesn't have to be further qualified al pi halacha. But v'chad amar, not debating anything we learned until now, but just limiting it. That all of the whole debate of lavud and avir is only when it comes near the side, but not be'emtza. Because if it's be'emtza, ein lavud be'emtza. And guys, let me explain to you what that means, ein lavud be'emtza. According to him, if you have a gap in the schach less than 3 tfachim, but going all the way across, then the sukkah is separated into two separate sukkahs. Then you don't have 3 walls on either side. I want to emphasize, which is the first Tosfos here, that this chamur dika opinion that says ein lavud be'emtza doesn't mean that you never say lavud be'emtza. That can't be. Tosfos proves what's going to happen now, chevra. If you have a sukkah, and in the middle of your sukkah somewhere, there's a little bit of a gap. No one says there's a problem with that. If the gap that you have in the middle, a square, or a circle, or rectangular, I don't care how it's shaped, if it's less than 3 tfachim, of course you say lavud. When we're debating lavud be'emtza, it's specifically referring to a scenario where the open gap goes all the way across the length of the sukkah, or all the way across the width of the sukkah. And here we taket, in order to say that the sukkah is still considered 1, we have to use lavud. Here is where this amoida, which we're going to say, it's Rav Acha's machmer. And he holds that to make the entire sukkah be considered 1, even though the gap is all the way across, ein lavud be'emtza. Says the Gemara, where does he get that from? The Tanya, and he learns it from the fact, we're going to compare now Shabbos and Sukah to Shabbos, then again the dinim chevra that we opened up Masechtas Eruvin with, and that is when you have a mavui that's eino mefulish, which means it's a mavui, it's a cul-de-sac, it's closed off from 3 sides. And midoiraisa you can already carry inside of it. Midrabanan, since it opens up towards the Reshus Harabim, you have to do something aside of the shituv muvois that we're not addressing here. Even if something begins by bein hashmashas in the mavui, you want to carry it from one part of the mavui to another part of the mavui, you have to have either a koida or a lechi. Of course, at Suras HaPesach is even better, but it's not needed, as we learned in Eruvin. So now when we're speaking about the crossbar, here is the Brais. Koida hayotzim in the koisel zeh. The koida, you have a crossbar that is connected to and going out of one of the sides, one of the walls, but instead of it touching the other side, ve'eno noigas b'koisel achad, it doesn't touch the other side. In other words, it's almost all the way through, but there is a gap. Or if a person began with two separate cross beams, hoping that they're going to meet each other in the middle. And this chacham, the bridges that they built, and they began on two opposite sides, and they didn't exactly meet, that's more or less what happened over here, with a lot less money loss. But are they considered connected or not? Do you have to add another koida to connect them or not? Says the Braisa like this: if the gap is pachus mishleisha, ein tzarich lavi koida acheres. But if the gap is shleisha, yes, tzarich lavi koida acheres. Gavaldik. And that is not only said if you have to connect a koida to the wall, everyone says lavud. That's even in the second case of the Braisa, if the koida and the other koida somewhere in the middle are not meeting. One is higher than the other, or one pachat, even if they would have met, but it was not, collectively it was not long enough, which is in the middle. Yet, clearly we say the din of lavud. And again, even though it's not all the way across, I know that, but this opinion will lean on this Braisa to say that even when the gap in the sukkah is all the way across, yes, we say the din of lavud. Yes, we say that the other Tana will say, the other Amoida will say there's no raya from here, like we mentioned the Tosfos. Because here it's not about separating one area from the other, it's not about all the way across, we can make those chilukim, but let's go weiter. The idach, the other Amoida will hold that even in this case, he says over here, Shane Koides, the Rabbana. In other words, since the need of connecting both sides is only of rabbinic nature, like we mentioned, Midoy Raisa, we're going to follow now shitas of the almost all the Rishonim. When you have a area that's sectioned off by three sides, it becomes midoy raisa as a bona fide reshus hayachid. For Hilchos Shabbos, the only need of the fourth wall is only midrabanan. So for dinei derabanan, we say lavud even be'emsa. But when it comes to building a sukkah, here midoy raisa, you have to have two walls and a bit. You have to have halachic three walls. So then if you have this gap all the way across the length, neither side has the three walls and everyone will be moided that it's not good. What will be the source of the other? Now, this Mishnah in Ahalois is going to differentiate between a skylight opened window in the roof, in middle, between whether it's a tefach by a tefach or less. And our Gemara won't quote the entire Braisa. It's not needed. So when the Braisa separates, differentiates between a aruba that is a tefach by a tefach versus an aruba that's not opened, it's less than a tefach by a tefach, that differentiation, the nafkamina and halacha, won't touch the din that we're learning about. What are we learning about? The simple din of tumas oil. What's the din of tumas oil? That if you have enough of a corpse, let's go with kizayis basar min hameis, that's under a roof, anything else, Adam, Vekalim, Oichlin, Umashkin, that are under that same roof will acquire Tumas Meis. Going down a notch, the Meis is a voice, and that will become a Av. Very simple. If you have a roof that has in it a skylight, the Meis is not under the skylight, he's under the roof. Just because there is a skylight in the roof doesn't take away the koyach of the roof to convey tumah to everything else under the roof. But if there is a person or a keli that's directly under the skylight, they won't acquire tumas oil. Let's read it inside. Aruba shababayis, and the skylight has poiseyach tefach. It means it has a tefach by a tefach. Tuma babayis, if there's something under the roof, kuloi tamei. Everything under the roof, anything that could become tamei. Again, Adam, Kalim, Oichlin, or Mashkin becomes tamei. However, Mashik and Neged Aruba, but if there is Adam, Kalim, Oichlin, or Mashkin directly under the skylight, then they don't acquire the tumah. Furthermore, second case, what happens if the tumah is directly under the skylight? Again, we're speaking about a skylight that's Pesach Tefach. So here says the Mishnah, Kol Habayis Kulei Tor. Why? Because it's not under the roof. Now guys, even before we go further, think about it. If we were to apply the din of lavud, what we would have said? What would we have said? We would have said, oh, lavud. I don't care if there's a aruba, even that's Pesach Tefach, it's less than 3 tefachim. Halachically, it's considered annexed. So, in both cases, the din would be that everything should acquire tumah. Clearly, you see that you don't say lavud by tumas oil. Next case in the Mishnah, really the next case won't change anything and it won't even differentiate concerning our halacha. What happens if ein ba'aruba Pesach Tefach? The window is even smaller. The skylight is even smaller. Same din. If tumah b'bayis, same halacha. Even though the aruba doesn't have a tefach, but if there is something keneged aruba, anything that's directly under the skylight, so you have a small keli that is mamish completely under the skylight, it remains stored. Tumah keneged aruba. Similarly, if the tumah is directly under the skylight, even though it doesn't have a tefach, we don't ignore it. No, then we say the tumah is not under an oil, and everything else under the roof remains stored. And why does this Mishnah differentiate between Pesach Tefach or not? You have to continue to read the Mishnah. Here you have a very important Tosfos, the second Tosfos, that says, that it appears for it to be a little bit different than the Rashi that we just learned. When we had the Gemara Gufa, why did we use the word Gufa for a Mishnah and Taras? So we spoke out, Bachla Rashi says that there's no Talmud. By the way, there's no Talmud Yerushalmi on Taras either. Not Bavli, other than Nida. So sometimes the Gemara loves to quote the Dinim and Taras and to quote various Amoroic statements on it to Chaparain and to have more Gemara on Taras. Here Tosfos says that the reason why we don't bring the entire Mishnah, I'm just reading the ending of the second Tosfos, Shederech HaGemara lekatzer Mishnayis shall say their Taras. And it doesn't contradict Rashi at all, because here we're not quoting any Amoroic statements on it. Proof here is that we don't use lavud horizontal. Because again, if we would say lavud, the whole Mishnah wouldn't stand. And by the way, that becomes a kash on the other Amayra. So says the Gemara, V'idach, Shani hilchas tuma dahachi gemir Elohu. It's amazing that God gave a unique set of rules. Gemira means halacha l'Moshe Sinai, concerning all of the dinim of Tumah, including how and when and where do we apply lavud. And just because clearly there is no lavud be'emtza, when it comes to Tumas oil, it doesn't have any effect on how we apply lavud when it comes to the other areas of halacha. Okay. Says the Gemara. Interesting, two stories, similar stories. There's a message over here. This is all referring back to halachas that we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin, that there was a time that Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, right? The great Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, the one that always opened up first, he once gave a drasha, and he said that Bayish Nifchas, if there is a breach in middle of the roof of the house, and the Yid puts chach on top of it, it's kosher. And by the way, that's what we learned in the Mishnah. But let's not forget that when is it kosher? Why is it kosher? Either no walls directly adjacent with the schach, and the Mishnah made it clear that's because you don't have 4 amas of standing roof. So there is less than 4 amas between the wall of the house and the schach, and we use doifen akuma halacha l'Moshe Sinai to say that halachically the walls of the house are the walls of the sukkah. Now Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi did not elaborate upon that. So Amar lefanav Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi, he said, Rebbe, he's referring to Rabbi Yehuda, Pareish, explain further. In other words, what you take it as a given, and that's the way it always worked, Chevra, that the earlier generations, they were more knowledgeable and they spoke more brief, they did not need to elaborate, and whenever the oilam for a while, temporarily, was a bit less learned, then there was a greater need to elaborate further. Like even when we review halachas, sometimes we just learn the Mishnah. You just, you give the Rashi Parakim and you chop the rest. And he felt that he has to elaborate more. And he told him, no, Kach Perish Abba. When my father taught this halacha, he elaborated it, by the way it's written in the Mishnah. Arba Amas Psula. He wanted to make it clear, just in case people forgot or they never learned it yet, that if there is a gap, if the breach in the ceiling was 4 amas away from the walls or more, then putting tzchach is not good. This whole din of doifen akuma is only pachos ma'arba amas then ksheir. And a similar story, another time, Darash Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, and that's the case of the fish that we're mentioning. That avruma is a name of a small kosher fish. And again, the issue of avruma is not about avruma itself, but it was in certain areas when you went fishing, and we're not talking about a fishing rod, we're talking about a fishing net, and you would chop a tremendous amount of fish. Sometimes there were other fishalach that were similar, but not avruma, that would be intermingled with it, and that would render a problem of kashrus. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi was speaking about his location, and he said that when you catch avruma, you can eat gezun tehait. By the way, the reason why we have an ashgach on tuna, I'm not even going about the question of bishul yisrael, or you don't need bishul yisrael. The ikar issue now with tuna is this issue. That all the kashrus agency says that you have to have a mashgiach over there to look on the conveyor belt because there's going to be other fish in many areas, or maybe in most areas today where we get tuna fish from, that you'll have other fish mingled with it. That's why people give it, that's the ikar reason, not to have machalas asurais. I'm not minimizing those who opine also bishul yisrael or not, but it's more than that when it comes to the mingling of different fishes. And again, he did not speak about that. And so the Rabbi Shmuel but Rabbi Yosi told Rabbi Yehuda but Rabbi Eloi, the Rosh Hamadabrim Rebbe, Pareish, sag weiter. Not everyone will know the ending of it or the elaboration. And he said, Kach Amar Abba, this is what my father said, that Shalma complaining, in those areas, Avruma is not kosher. Because it's not about, you can't give a categorical statement for people who don't know that you did not mean for it to be categorical. Shalmakim ploini, it's muteres. It depends on the location. In those locations where other fishes were not found, there it's good. And indeed, similar, ki hadamar Abaya. Abaya was speaking about a fish called tzachanta. Same issue. Tzachanta, is kosher, had the simonim of kashrus, but there were certain locations where mingled with tzachanta in those rivers, there were other fishes that looked very similar, but that were not kosher. So Abaya said, and Abaya was more specific, that tzachanta from the river of Bav, the Bav Nahara, there it's sharia. In other words, just like Abaya didn't just say tzachanta, you can catch tzachanta. No, tzachanta in the Bav River, implying that in other rivers it's not kosher. Now, why was it taka? Why did we not have non-kosher fish together with tzachanta in the Bav? My tamo, the reason why certain rivers don't have non-kosher fish is because the difamayim is wherever there is a quick current. Maybe kosher, non-kosher fish cannot survive in quick currents. And why would you think so? Since it has no spinal cord, and we're speaking specifically about smaller fish. So if you're small and you don't have a spinal cord, you don't have koyach to swim in rivers whose waters flow swiftly. So if you think that's the matzi koyim, they can't survive there, that's not true. The metzias is not so. That even if the fish is small, and even if it has no spinal cord, it could survive in a river, even if the waters are flowing swiftly. If you're going to say the reason why in the Bav River you don't have other similar fish that are not kosher, because it's not sweet waters, it's salty waters. And when it comes to non-kosher fish and smaller fish, klipe means like they don't have scales. So they can't survive in salt water. It's nishtemes. Just he explained that in the river of Bav, the loimarabet tinayu doktami. Tinayu is silt. So you have silt in waters. And a certain type of silt will clog the gills of non-kosher fish, especially when they're small. So because of that unique characteristic of the Bav River, Pashat, they couldn't live there, they couldn't survive there. So therefore, when you chop fish, you can be assured that it's only tzachant. Now, why was it important to know the reason? The Gemara tells you why. So Amar Avina, perfect. that ve'ha'idna, now, the shavchi nahar eson v'nahar gamda lo hasam, whether they made something like the Panama Canal, something happened that from when the statement was made until when this latter statement was made, other rivers now had an entry point in where those waters entered the Bav River. And the moment that happened, the only issue is that non-kosher fish cannot survive because the silt, which is on the floor of the riverbed, would go and kill the non-kosher fish. But if there's a constant new influx from other rivers that don't have that silt into the Bav River, so weiter, now it's asir. Because now he was saying that in the Bav River you can have a mixture enough for it to pose a problem. If you would have a mashgiach, we're not saying the fact, if you can have a conveyor belt like today and you can look at every single fish that you catch, of course, if you can do it, then separate the non-kosher from the kosher, which is exactly what they do by tuna fish, and then you can eat it gesundheit. Okay.
What does this discussion have to do with anything?
We're just showing that when Rabbi Yehuda ben Belelli, when he gave drashes, I understand this, that the oilam that learned by Rabbi Yehuda ben Belelli was very learned. And therefore, when he would speak, he didn't find it important to qualify his statements. He knew that the people knew that what he's saying is not across the board. And Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi acknowledged, that's the way I understand, that the oilam was very learned, but he found it important, if you review a law, qualify it when it's such a fundamental qualification. Someone like us can go hear it and not know that his statement was not made across the board and wrongfully apply it to a place where it's not applicable. Weiter. Okay, now Chaver, we're going back, we're in the second to last line. In the Mishnah gave 3 examples of doif and akoma. Very clear. Correct, the Mishnah Daf Yud Zayin. The first example was Bayesh Nifchas, which was this drash of Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi. The second example that the Mishnah gave was by a Chotzer Shimukefas Achsadra. So if you could just imagine, you have a courtyard. In front of the courtyard means that not backyards, they used front yards, that all of the houses would share the same front yard. Normally the courtyards will be open to the heavens. But whenever the homes are 2 stories, which is very common, and every second story has a porch, now guys, the porch for story number 2 automatically becomes a roof for the ground level home. That means when they walk into the homes, they have a little protrusion of a roof over their heads. So the Mishnah was speaking about, why do you have to build walls? Just take schach and put it on the roofs, from one roof to the other, and you have yourself a 3-walled sukkah. And the Mishnah said, well, like this, if the roofs don't protrude 4 amas, if it's a drop less than 4 amas, good, doif and akoma, but the moment it's 4 amas, it's not good. Right? Very clear cut. Now let's listen to what happens, how this becomes further unpackaged here by the Amoraim. Itmer, it was stated that sichech al gaba achsadra, that when you have this porch, and here it's a given, the porches that we are talking about have 4 amas or more. A very good picture. They have 4 amas or more. So, based on the Mishnah, no way you can put schach on top of in the middle open area. However, if sheyesh by patzimin, if there are columns, now guys, the columns were not made at all for anything inside what we will call now the sukkah area. The columns were made to beautify the entrance to the homes, and that is of tremendous significance, as we will learn. Now, let's go back to the din of lavut. What's the din of lavut? And we said this, l'kula alma, that on a vertical wall, if in between each column there's less than 3 tvachim, that's mamash called walls. And that's why it makes sense, right? In Ishiyesh by Patzimin, it's kosher. Because lavud, you have new walls. Now, you can ask, what's even the chiddush here? We'll get to that. We're going to see soon another version on Daf Yutes. But let's begin even with this. The last line is the
problem if it's greater than 4 tvachim.
Because if the roof does not protrude 4 amas, samach, then you have the din of doif and akuma. Then the walls of the house become the walls of the sukkah. Then you're good to go. You don't need to have columns. They're speaking about that the roof goes 4 amas or more away from the homes. So you don't have the walls of the homes. Yet,
the 4 amas are going the other direction.
The 4 amas, in other words, you have a vertical wall. The roof comes out horizontally. If the roof is 4 amas, that's what it said in the Mishnah. Then you got yourself a problem. You can't just put schach in the center of the courtyard because you don't have walls. Says the Gemara, if these homes were built in a way where you had pitzimin going to the under the roof area, those can be used because of lavud as walls. However,
because the 4 amas are too far away from the wall to be considered part of the wall.
Exactly. Now, here's a chiddush. She'ein lo patzimin, but if you don't have columns, now l'choira, guys, this is the case of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said clearly it's not good. And we're going to deal with the Mishnah, don't worry. We know the Mishnah. And that comes along Abaya, and he says a gavaldik chiddush. He says, I know that they made in the picture that's on the screen, imaginary patzimin, but whatever, it's more than that. It's kosher. And Rava says, of course not. That's the Mishnah puzzle. Now, before we go on, guys, just remember, whenever there's a machlokes Abaya and Rava, other than the 6 cases of Yal Kegam, the halacha is like Rava. The halacha is like Rava. No, we're going to have to just understand, how can Abaye say it's kosher? Abaye Omak Sheira, how is it Shayach? Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis. So here, we spoke this out on the intro, because Abaye says, Omrinon Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem. These are the words, which means the edge of the roof extends downwards and it seals. Now, don't jump. Why don't we always say Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem according to Abaye and never build walls? Just begin with that, just to repeat. When you build just a frame by putting by all the 4 sides little pillars, and then you're going to go ahead and put schach on top, for sure for Sukah it's worth 0. Because there you only create the walls after you have the Pi Tikra. You can never build a Sukah by first building the schach and then building the walls. Here the beauty is that these roofs were built a whole year. They're here already. Another important detail, just to know, that the thickness of the roof has to be 1 tefach. If it's lesser than that, no one says Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem. Another detail.
But isn't it 4 amas? How does it help that it's Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem?
Very good, Tzvika.
So the Doifin Akum only qualifies for less than 4 amas.
Correct.
How does it help us?
I'll tell you, Tzvika. The Doifin Akuma means that you're using the wall of the house for the wall of the Sukkah. It's not close to the schach. And we learned in the Mishnah that if there's already 3 tfachim of airspace, you can't connect it. But there is schach. It's possible schach. There's a roof. So halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we view the roof as the wall of the house. In other words, if you have the wall of the house is not Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem. It's a proper wall. It's a vant. It's a wall of a house. Here it's 4 amas or more away from the house. You don't have the Doifin Akuma. And again, the Mishnah clearly said it's not good. We'll see what Abaye understands with the Mishnah. Abaye is telling us that simply because here the roof was built before you built the schach, this is unusual. In other words, there's a roof connected to the house. If the thickness of the roof is 1 tefach, it's as if, Tzvika, the roof goes down right by the edge of the roof. The edge of the roof goes down. So that wall is connected to the sukkah. You're not even using lavud, it's mamash at the edge of the sukkah. I hope that's clear. Good? Not clear. No problem. No. Let's do this thing, it's important. This is the whole. So here we go, Tzvika. I have over here, let's say this is a tefach thick. I just want to see Tzvika. This is a tefach thick. Okay? If I say Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem, it means halachically it's as if there's a wall over here. Here is the house. So if the roof is less than 4 amas away from the wall of the house, it's not Pi Tikra. I'm using the wall of the house to be the wall of the sukkah. It's as if this is the wall of the sukkah. That's the Mishnah. If it protrudes 4 amas, you can't use the wall of the house. There's no wall of the house. There is the edge of the roof. Here is the house, here is the edge of the roof. Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem means it goes down from this edge. The schach is over here. You paste this.
Dotted lines in the picture. That's the wall.
That's the wall. I don't like the lines because it makes it look like columns, but okay, it's better than the other pictures. I'm happy with this. It's a real wall. I hope it's clear.
Lines is telling you that it's imaginary.
It's a halachic wall.
It's imaginary, right?
It's a halachic wall. I don't like imaginary. It's considered a wall. Now, guys, people, again, this is the ikid. So hold on, who needs walls? Just build thick schach. No. If I'm going to build thick schach, then I'm building the walls after the schach. That's not good. The beauty here, look at the picture that we have on the screen over here. The roof or the porch was built before you built the sukkah. You have the walls. So if you have the walls, Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisem. What about Rava? Rava says, Lo yomrinin pi tikra yored v'soisam. I don't subscribe to that when it comes to sukkahs. Now, guys, everyone knows that there is, in some areas, pi tikra yored v'soisam. So this is going to have to be clarified. So we'll explain why in our scenario, it doesn't work. Put the picture up one more time, and I want to speak out the whole Gemara, which will go into Yutes. Guys, let me explain like this. When this roof was built here, when this roof was made, and it was made to roof what area? The Sukah area or the non-Sukah area? This roof was made to cover the non-Sukah area. And that will substantially differentiate our case from other cases where everyone says you say pi tikra yored v'soisam. No, it's by heart. When you have Shabbos, you're out there in the field. It's very common now because of the heat. You have what you call these big tents, like we have in front of the Shul Shabbos. So it's basically just 4 poles, and then there's a rooftop. If the rooftop would have 1 tefach of thickness, of Hilchas Shabbos, dear pi tikra yored v'soisam would mean that you can carry anything under that rooftop, even though there isn't a single wall. Here, we're taking it further because the roof was not made, we're not using the area for which the roof was made. We're using that wall for adjacent. That's a chiddush. That's a bias chiddush. Okay, says the Gemara,
It was meant to sit under. You normally would sit under it for shade.
Exactly.
Now you're using the part that you didn't create.
Exactly. That's why Rava says we don't say pi tikra in our case. Very good. Now let's go weiter. Third line. Amalei Rava la Abaye. If you're going to say pi tikra yored v'soisam, so he says a simple case. I want to know something. If I build myself a 3-walled sukkah, guys, the sukkahs that we're learning in Masech, the sukkah is a 3-walled sukkah, built in the middle of in your backyard, built on the street. Built in the middle of a courtyard that made no aid of Chatzeres. Think about it, guys. After you built the sukkah, you have to build the walls. You build 3 walls. And then you put schach that's a tefach thick. What happens if one wall falls down? Are we going to say, pi tikra yored v'soisam? L'chayre, yes. But no one ever said such a thing. Oh, that's what he asked. According to you, afilu hifchis doifen emtsoi. No one is going to say that you can rely on it lechatchila because you only get the doifen after you got the schach. You're finished. But if you built the walls, you built 3 walls. You built 3 walls, and then the center wall collapsed. After you built the walls, after you put the schach, now l'chayra, you already had 3 walls. When the physical wall fell down, we should automatically replace it with the pi tikra halachic wall. If you use pi tikra by sukkah,
From what? There's no wall left.
No, tzemach. If you have schach that's thick a tefach. If you have schach that's thick a tefach, so again, just to put schach, no one will say it's good because then you have the walls after the schach. But if you first built walls, then you put the schach, everything is good. Now a wall is going to collapse. Are you going to say pi tikra? So Amarle says Abaya to Rava, that's just an example, the picture of thick schach. And you can see, you can walk through it. No, Medina lach bahahi, I'll be moided that here you can't say it. You know why? Because just like when you have an open alleyway from both sides, since people walk right through it, it breaks certain potential halachic walls. Let me add something, just like we learned that if the wall doesn't have, there's 3 tfachim gap from wall until the ground. Why do the chachamim other than Rabbi Yossi not say good achis? Because Gidiyim boikem boy. So he's saying, even Abaye is moide, that when you don't have a 3-walled sukkah, not in the case of the courtyard where it's mamish closed off, the whole inner area is the sukkah, the whole inner area. If you stam build a sukkah, and there's a different domain outside of the sukkah, if one wall collapses, even Abaye won't use pi tikra yored v'soisam, because the fact that it becomes like an open alleyway, the people's ability to walk through it destroys the pi tikra. But coming back to our case, which is the case of their machlokes, the sukkah is mamish in the entirety of the chutzir, aside of the area under the roof. But that's called a closed area. So that's why Abaye is telling you that even if you don't have Patsimin, the Sukkah is kosher. Now, says the Gemara Lema, that Abaye and Rava, who are arguing here by Sukkahs, are following exactly the same achloikas, not of Tanoim, but of the earliest generation, Amoraim, of Rav and Shmuel Komifligi. In Hilchah Shabbos, the Itmar, as we learned, and we had this in Eruvin. Achsadra bevika. A pavilion is, Pashat, you have 4 pillars, and the Ikir was not to build walls, but to build a shaded off area. Not a single wall. A bika, if you remember, has a din of a karmelis. Midrabanan, you can't carry taladamas or more. What can you carry under this achsadra? Can you carry under this pavilion? Can you carry under this tent? Machloikas Rav and Abaye, Rav and Shmuel. Rav says mutar l'talta b'kulei. Now, l'chayra, what is Rav saying? That's a great picture. Again, it's important for the roof to be a tefach. Rav says, pi tikra for all 4 walls. And guys, don't forget that over here people can also walk straight through it. I want to make that clear. And we will always have to fall back to what we spoke out before. That even though over here people can walk straight through it, but at least the cover was made for the area underneath it. The Pitikra Yored V'Soisam will also wall off the area underneath it. It's easier to apply it. Shmuel, however, says, Ein metaltal ba. There are no walls. Now, you can carry within daladamas because you can always carry within daladamas. Because the loyamrin and pitikra yored of the soisim. So l'chayr, okay, that's the same achloikas. Abaye and Rava. Abaye says pitikra yored of the soisim will be like Rav, and Rava will be saying like Shmuel. And the Gemara says absolutely not. Nisht. The last line in the Amid says the Gemara is Aliba de Shmuel. What does Shmuel say that we do not say pitikra yored of the soisim? Everyone will agree, both Abaye and Rava, that if you don't say Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam in the case of the Achsadra Bebika, which is where the cover was made for the area underneath it, then for sure, in our case of Sukah, you for sure cannot say Pi Tikra Yored V'Soisam, where you are using that halachic wall not for the area under the roof, but for the area adjacent to the roof, on top of which you put the schach, that you test. Ki pligi, there's going to be a machloikas, but the machloikas both of Abaye and in Rava is all going to be b'shitas Rav. It happens to be that we paskin like Rav. So therefore, their machlekes is very relevant, because since we paskin like Rav, here in itself you can debate. Abaye says, well, I hold like Rav. Rav uses pitikra yored v'soisim to create 4 walls over there in Achsadra Bebika. Same thing will be here by Hilchas Sukah. Rava says, no, ad kan loy omar Rav Hasam Elom. Here are the words that we said out before by heart. Since that the mechitzos, meaning guys, the halachic mechitzos, the mechitzos of Pi Tikra, is la'achsadra hu da'avidi, you are using them to close off, to section off even more the same very area that the roof is covering. The achsadra is to cover the area underneath it, and by saying Pi Tikra, you are further viewing that area as even really enclosed by partitions. But over here, since the lav lahachi avidi, the roof was not the roof was not made for the sukkah. The roof was made to give shelter to the area underneath the roof. The roof was made to be a porch to the area, to the physical area over the roof. Right? It was made as a porch for the second story. But it was not built at all for the area outside of the roof. And pitikra yored v'soisim, you're building a wall for the area outside the roof. So even according, Rava holds that even according to Rav, here we will not say it. Here we will not say it. Let me just read 2 more lines, because we're going to continue learning the next daf. But the biggest problem will be, how can Abaye say what he's saying when it's mamash going against the Mishnah, guys? I mean, the Mishnah said that if you have a achsadra and you have the same case of the porch, if it's 4 amos away, it's not good. Now, Mela to say our Mishnah is not speaking about pillars, fine, 100%. If there are pillars, then love it. But how can Abaye make a statement even when there's no pillars? So frek the Gemara, guys, were 4 lines from the top of the Amid. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, V'chein chatzir, hamukefes achsadro, the Mishnah writes explicitly that if the roof goes out 4 amos or more, ubemela, you lost the doifen akuma, then the sukkah is invalid. V'amai, why would it be invalid? Why don't we say, pitikra yored v'soisam? Push it. Answers now the beauty here, the Avos Yisrael, is that even though Rava disagreed with Abaye, but Rava explained how our Mishnah doesn't contradict Abaye. Rava defended Abaye. Tirigma Rava leave with Abaye. That our Mishnah, that's the final nuance in today's shiur, is kishehishva eske ruyoi, which means that when you put the schach, you know when you say pi tikra yored v'soisam, it's not only if the roof has a thickness or a height of a tefach. It's not just that. It's that the area that is using that tikra, the area that has to see, they have to see the edge of the roof. Now, if the schach would have been placed above the roof, then anyone standing at the right angle would physically be able to see the descent of the tikra, the tefach. Our Mishnah is saying that they inserted the schach in a way that it's flush with the opening in the roof. So therefore, whether you are under the schach, whether you are under the roof and you look up, you will never see the side, the edge of, you won't see it. It's covered with the schach. In such a case, even Abaye's Maida, you cannot use the pitikra yored v'soisam. The only solution will be by using the wall of the house. Well, that's the din that the Mishnah is focusing on. That yes, halacha l'moishe misinai doifen akuma, but doifen akuma is only less than 4 amos. However, the machloikas that we have on Daf Yud Ches in the bottom, machloikas amoyroim, is where the schach was put above the roof. It's laying on the floor of the second story. So when people are downstairs and they look up, they can actually visualize, they can see how the roof comes down a tefach. Here, according to Abaye, according to Rav, we say, Pi tikra yored v'soisam, God willing to be continued.